Master Philosophy in Urban and Regional Planning. He's involved with research, planning, and design of urban housing while teaching at the Mapua University. In 2009, his paper, Rising Core House, a vision of a sustainable low-income urban housing linked with income generation for slum upgrading and poverty alleviation, was published in Espacio Journal, a journal on Philippine art, architecture, and the allied arts. His paper describes the incremental housing process and house design that is energy efficient and water efficient that can create livelihood opportunities for low-income communities. He has been a shelter and planning consultant for international organizations, the Philippine national government agencies, and non-government organizations. His recent roles included a project development officer of the Department of Social Welfare and Development for the Estero de San Miguel pilot project in 2014. He's also a World Bank technical consultant for the High-Density Housing of Social Housing and Finance Corporation in 2014. He is also a technical consultant for the Pope Francis Village in Tacloban, an in-city housing project for the rehabilitation of the Typhoon Haiyan victims in 2015, with the Urban Poor Associates and a consortium of church organizations and non-government organizations. And currently, he is working on the Jesse M. Robredo Village in Manila for the in-city high-density housing for the relocation of informal settler families in danger zones and waterways. Friends, let us welcome today architect Albert Zambrano.
Thank you, Lynn, for the introduction. Pleasant good morning to everyone. On my way here, I was expecting to find some people I know, and indeed, I found some people I know who are doing some community work. And I'm also glad that I met some new people who are also doing community work. So I'm really glad to be sharing the same room with you, people who are working for the protection of the environment and working also for the welfare of their fellow men. Okay, so in this presentation, I will be sharing with you some of my experiences in the works that I have done. I tested it a while ago. It was working, but now it's no longer working. Mine is also not working. Okay, so it will be an example of a disaster response project undertaken by the national government of the Philippines in partnership with NGOs and community organizations. And I will share some observations and lessons learned from the field from participatory planning. My outline is, first, I'll be giving you a very quick background on how the project started, and then some details on the project. I have a lot of pictures, I have a lot of slides, about 100 slides, but I'll go through them very quickly, and then if you want to go back to the other slides later during the question and answer portion, well, we can do that. And finally, as conclusions, I will be sharing you my observations and what I think about future of participatory planning. This is an exciting age to be looking at future of participatory planning. Quickly, here are some of my references for this presentation. Okay, so how did the Estero de San Miguel started? The Philippines average of 20 typhoons a year, increasing also in intensities, located in the Pacific Ring of Fire. Metro Manila, 15 million in population, 35% of the Philippine economy emanates from Manila. In September 26, Ondoy or Typhoon Ketsana hit Luzon and Metro Manila, affected 4.9 million people, 30,000 totally destroyed, 154 partially damaged, 464 dead, and then 529 injured, 11 billion pesos in damages. Damage losses is equivalent to 2.7 GDP, substantial damage and losses on productive sectors. Damage or lost inventories, raw materials and crops, business operations interrupted by access, problems, power and water shortages, damage machinery and absent employees. So during that time, we did not have a business continuity program. Okay, so now we know better. And then barely 2 weeks, another typhoon hit. Typhoon Parma or Pepeng, and it affected Luzon and Metro Manila as well, affected 14,800 people, 465 fatalities, 6,800 totally destroyed, 27.3 billion in damages. Both Ondoy and Pepeng have affected or displaced over 1 million school children and 21,000 daycare workers and teachers. 3,400 schools, 36 colleges and universities, and about 2,800 daycare centers were affected or damaged. So it caused a lot of disruptions. So here are some of images or headlines when that happened, just to refresh our memories of what has happened. This is Estero Gulayan. This is a photo. So this is the before and after. You see these shanties, and aftermath of the typhoon, they were all, well, most of them were washed up. So what was the government response? These were some of the responses. Oplan Likas, 2011, and the Flood Management Master Plan for Metro Manila and surrounding areas in 2012. So let me discuss first the Flood Control Master Plan. It is to establish a roadmap for a sustainable and flood risk management in Metro Manila until 2035. So it is based on five river basins, including Pasig, Marikina, Laguna Lake, and other waterways. So they did a simulation for this project, a scenario wherein there's a project and no project scenario. Okay, now let's go back to Oplan Likas, which is the focus of my presentation. Oplan Likas, in reaction to one of the most devastating storms to hit Metro Manila. It's a program to relocate more than 104,000 IFS from danger zones. It was approved by then President Aquino in 2011. It's a 5-year, 50 billion resettlement program to clear the Metro Manila waterways of informal settlers living precariously along and on top of the waterways. So it involved 6 major waterways. Oplan Likas, implementing agencies, you have NHA, SHFC, DSWD, and LGUs. Well, it's actually, NHA is the government-mandated agency to produce housing, so why include other government agencies? During that time, they were discussing, NHA cannot possibly do it alone. And besides, the competition would probably be good for the agencies. So it would encourage innovation as well. Policy guidelines. So there was this joint memorandum circular for the operationalization and utilization of the 50 billion. It specifies that the relocation are to be on-site, in-city, off-sites may be resorted only if requested by the affected families. Now, this decision was based on a previous World Bank study studying welfare outcomes of in-city and off-city. So, all things being equal, they found out that on-site produced more or better welfare outcomes. The planning is bottom-up in accordance with the people's planning approach. Now, this is specifically specified. It has to be a people's planning approach. Now, let me define what is the people's planning approach or people's plan. So it's in response to failures of previous approaches of off-city relocation. In relocation sites, there are not enough facilities, no work, there's distance to workplaces, so people have to pay higher transportation costs. So that would contribute more to carbon emissions. And people return to cities again to squat. definition of people's plan is an alternative proposal developed by organized informal settler families to establish safe, decent, affordable community located close to their source of livelihood. The process of developing the plan is highly participatory. The beneficiaries are not only consulted but also have a direct participation in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of the plan. So that's the definition, highly participatory. But studies of evaluation of the program does not show that this is actually what happened. Okay, a people's plan, this approach allowed the community themselves to look for suitable sites, plan their community with the assistance of community organizers and technical consultants of their choosing. So they can choose the engineers, they can even choose engineers from their own communities who are more familiar with the conditions of the site. The role of the government agencies is to fund and facilitate the implementation of the people's plan. So NGOs, academic and private sector provided coordination, technical management, and management support. Implementing agencies evaluated the plans, making sure it complies with government standards and are in accordance to the goals of the government. So it was the implementing agencies that helped fund and or finance the project. So here are some of the projects that were completed for Oplan Likas. Okay, so the joint memorandum is very good on paper, but after some evaluations, there were some issues. Okay, so because in city, there were a lot of land constraints, and the need to accelerate the implementation of Oplan Likas, many of the settlements became off-city, some which were very distant from the original communities and characterized by incomplete facilities and services. During the first years of the implementation of the program, it was very slow. And then towards the end of the term of President Aquino, they started rushing the projects to complete the implementation of the program. So a lot of participatory principles were forgone or were just not implemented. And then in Ateneo, they had a sort of workshop. They found out that existing are not standardized, so people don't really have a good idea what constitutes a really participatory people's plan. So participants also asserted that irregularities can be found from the formulation throughout the implementation. One key constraint cuts across both demand. So lack of citywide participatory shelter planning tackled shelter challenges in a systematic manner. So it's usually project-based. Not all, in the program you have hundreds of projects, and not all of those projects could implement a lot of participatory principles. Now, with the Estero de San Miguel, it's a small project actually, and it's a pilot project compared to other Oplan Likas projects. We made extra effort to make participatory planning work, and we incorporated as much green and sustainable design principles in the project, and as much disaster resilient features as we could. So it was a strategic pilot project where participatory and green building principles and disaster resilient features are incorporated. Okay, so I will now show you some details of Estero de San Miguel. So you have here City of Manila, there's Paseco, mouth of the Pasig River. Estero San Miguel is a waterway that surrounds Malacanang Palace. It's about right here. And this is one of the well-known schools, San Beda College. There's the football field. Notice this here, these fine grained structures. This is the ISFs along the waterway. And then a part of the principle of a people's planning approach is it's the people themselves who have to look for land. Okay, so when they started looking for land, they suggested, they found some portions right here where they could build. So they identified these areas. So we explored the feasibility on building shelter on this narrow stretch of land. So we made some studies. Okay, so these are some of the pictures of the site. and there's San Pedro College. Notice here, it's daytime and yet the spaces in there are dark. And notice here, there's a light bulb right here. This is some kind of a hallway going to the houses of people. So it's very dark, and I would think that, it's very dark. So I think a lot of airborne diseases could easily propagate in the area, especially tuberculosis or colds and flus. And once in a while, after a storm, this happens. A house gets destroyed or damaged. And this is the barangay hall back in 2013. Notice it is on the 3-meter easement of the waterway. In the Philippine Water Code, you have to keep the waterways 3 meters clear. And this is the barangay hall. And here you can see some of the houses. The previous pictures are way up there in the background. You just can't see it due to the darkness. Okay, so what are some of the participatory tools that we have employed? So we had a lot of seminars and workshops. I'm an architect by profession, so I took care of I was in charge of the technical part. But later on, I will show you that the People's Plan has 7 elements, and I'm in charge with 2 elements there. So there were hundreds of consultation meetings. I did some drawing on the ground, and I also made use of the latest technologies in 3D walkthrough visualizations. This was my first site visit, and there's the chairman, si Kamena. And then shortly after that, I went there with some of my students and engineering students, so we did a quick survey. And then we did some 3D modeling of the proposed structures. The engineers and myself and other technical people, so we understand very well the technicalities, but the people, they don't know, they only have their bodies where they could relate on measurements. Okay, so I asked them to form a line and stretch their arms so they could visualize how much space they would have if they would build houses here. And then, although this is Photoshop, during that time I had to paint. So I did some vandalism on the pavement. I painted the floor, and that's where we discussed how the layouts of the houses are going to be and what are the implications of each layout until we arrived at a plan. Okay, so we discussed on simple descriptions, and then simple sketches, then computerized drawings, 3D computerized models. We did a mock-up, and then we constructed a model unit, so we would have a proof of concept, validation, and refinement, and then the mass implementation. And of course, with the many meetings that we had, some concepts have crystallized, and we have formed some paradigms with regards to in-city housing. Like, these are some of them I would like to point out or emphasize. In-city social housing is an investment on people. In-city social housing is protecting the environment, reducing carbon emissions and energy efficiency. So people don't have to travel very far. They don't contribute to traffic. So we reduce transportation demand. In-city social housing is not just charity or human rights, but it is also for having a pool of manpower to build the city in its development. Corporations, enterprises would need manpower. And the efficiency of our city is to make it more prosperous in the long term. The city is not resilient enough investment flows is curtailed. Resiliency levels can adversely affect the operations and profitability of enterprises. Okay, so these were the paradigms that we have formulated. And then because of the nature of the area, it was very narrow, we had to innovate. So this is we coined this word, the micro-medium-rise building, and the design concept is we have to reduce household expenses, and we have to increase income-generating opportunities so that in some way we could reduce poverty. So that was the original intention. Okay, let me just skip this. So So the micro-medium rise building was designed to be energy efficient, water efficient, so the poor can have savings on rising electricity bills and water bills. It accommodates home-based enterprises so the poor can supplement their income. And then we employed everything in the book on green design features, rainwater harvesting, natural light, green water reuse, local materials, reused recycled materials, durable materials, vermin resistant, green wall with edible landscaping, linked with income generation. So we tried everything. Later I will show you how we were able to accomplish this. And disaster resiliency features, straight line of force, regular spacing of columns, 1:3 ratio, multi-directional of columns, and magnitude of 7 and 250 with resistance. And the pocket parks is an important component of it because it's an extension of the living rooms. This is more like a more public living room. This is a space for community gatherings, meetings, space for urban agriculture. It will reduce heat island effect, create an attractive community urban space, and accessible playground for children. So the goal was to disaster prevention and resilience. So the discussions back then was, after a disaster, government would have to spend money. So why not spend money before the disaster? In the process, we will be saving lives and property. So, and reduce poverty, mitigate effects of climate change. So the objectives is recover the 3-meter easement of Esteros, provide durable and safe shelter, create open spaces and parks, create livelihood opportunities. And this is the master plan. As you can see, it's a very small project. And we also have identified home-based enterprises that people could engage in without being disruptive. Okay, so the concept of the building is the ground floor has to be a flood buffer where people could store their things, where they could have their bicycles or motorcycles, or could be a storage space. And then the dwelling places could be up there. And then here you have a green wall. You could put plants here that are edible or vegetables. And then here, the layout, as you notice, it's very small, but it was very important that in the layout, there should be privacy. You could close this space so that women would have a separate space for sleeping. And then in the layout also, you have windows on 2 sides of the structure. That way, there's an opening where air could circulate. They could enter one place and then exit in another. So it would be cooler. And then we try to incorporate rainwater harvesting and rainwater reuse. So we've installed plastic water drums to collect rainwater. So after the plan was crafted, the national government agencies and the national government made a proclamation to secure the land. Actually, the land that they were looking at were residual accretion land. So a proclamation has to be issued for this purpose. Now, these are some of the open spaces. This area could not fit the minimum space requirements without encroaching on the 3-meter easement. So we made it into a basketball court. This area is a vegetable garden. And this is a wall. And these are some completed structures. So that's the green wall. So they made use of soda bottles to plant. This is water spinach, and also we also planted pet chai, so they can be harvested every 30 days. Here's the entrance to the unit, and the kitchen. It's a very small kitchen. In the Philippines, the toilet also functions as the laundry area. And then we have here a design for the toilet. Notice the toilet window is different from most toilets that you see. It's a little larger, and the window is frosted. So the reason for that is, if you open the window, you can hang your clothes out there to dry. And if you look closer, there is the water tank, the rainwater harvesting tank, wherein you can draw water for flushing the toilet. And you can also use that for cleaning the floors, or washing the plants, or soaking the pans, I mean. So there. And these are just to give the community some ideas on recycled materials for furniture. Here are some before and after images. So this was the barangay center. So you can see it's gone in this picture, but replaced by the model unit. So we built the model unit first, just to test the concept. And then we try to determine how we may improve it more before we applied, before we constructed more structures. Okay, so this is Aling Feli. So this is her her store, sari-sari store. And here you can see her teary-eyed right after she moved in. And this is the Chairman Mena. She was being interviewed. This was her house. It's actually very dark here, but now this is her house. So it's more airy now. It has more sunlight and air. Originally, the intention was for the ground floor to be a commercial space, but in the plan, anyway, plans are just guides. Eventually, at the later stages of the project, they determined that it's more important to house people. So to add more units, they were converted into housing units. And notice what they did here. They added a partition. And here, they built this structure. It's like a loft, and they added a ladder going up there. And this one, the bottom part is open, and then you have they add some kind of a loft. So here are some of my observations and the future of participatory planning. Okay, so these observations are primarily drawn from the Estela de San Miguel pilot project, but I've also drawn some from my experiences with the JMRD village. This is what I'm working on right now. This is in Manila. And then also some of my experiences in Tacloban. This is the Pope Francis village. It's the only in-city housing for Typhoon Haiyan in Tacloban. Okay, so there are 7 major steps in drafting a people's plan. And my focus is on steps 4, formulation, and the implementation, number 5, because it's all technical, being an architect. So my proposed participatory physical planning framework, so this is what I formulated based on my observations. It all has to start with the community members. So we start with a sketch plan and narratives. So we conduct a workshop. I ask them to write down their thoughts, what are their expectations, the potentials of the site or of the project. And I ask them to make sketches. And then from there, I also ask them to have some discussions so that ideas are also voiced out and they are crystallized. And from there, we now move to the base plan. The base plan is a translation, a technical translation of the sketches that people has done. These are like artworks. Sometimes they would look like children's drawings. But they're really cute and they look very nice. And then we translate them into technical plans and drawings where other consultants would be able to understand. And then another step is adjusted plan. So in the adjusted plan, the base plan will be reviewed by other technical consultants like architects, engineers, geologists, and it will be reviewed by other stakeholders. Could be government, donors, proponents, and sociologists, and lawyers, consultants, so that we cover as much as possible the feasibility of the project. So it would have to go several cycles until a plan is produced that is advantageous to everyone. And then we implement the plan. Of course, during implementation, there would be some minor modifications. There are some things that, that cannot be determined beforehand.